Chapter 8. Yeah, all right, the greasy looking man on the comm display said. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. Let's try it again. I've already told you twice, Luke said, putting some grouchy wariness into his voice and expression. It's not going to change just because you think it ought to. So tell me again. Your name is. Mencio, Luke said tiredly, glancing out the viewport at the hundreds of asteroids drifting past and wondering which one this particular sentry was hiding on. I work for Wesselman, and I got a shipment to deliver to you. Which part of that don't you understand? Let's start with the part about you and Wesselman, the man growled. He never mentioned anyone named Mencio before. I'll have him send you a complete crew list when I get back, Luke said sarcastically. Watch your mouth, the other snapped. For a long moment he stared hard at Luke's face. Luke gazed back, trying to look as bored and unconcerned as possible. All things considered, the face of Luke Skywalker had to be one of the most recognizable in the galaxy. But with darkened hair and skin, an artificial beard, a Gora's-style slant added to the outer corner of his eyes, and a pair of scars slicing across one cheek, he should be able to pass completely unrecognized. Another thing is that pincers usually make this run, the sentry said at last. How come he's not here? He came down with something and can't fly, Luke said. Which was true, more or less. Pinchers should still be snoozing in peaceful oblivion back on Wistrel until the influence of the Jedi healing trance Luke had put on him. His associates were not going to be happy with the smuggler for letting Luke get the drop on him that way. On the other hand, when he came out of the trance, he ought to be healthier than he'd been in years. Look, I haven't got all week to sit out here dishing the dust with you, Luke continued. You gonna let me in, or do I take it back to Wesselman and let him charge you a double delivery fee? I don't care. I get paid either way. The sentry growled something unintelligible. All right, keep your blaster tucked. What do you got? A little of everything, Luke told him. Some Norsum DRX-55 lift mines, a few Praxon emergency survival pods, some GTU power armor suits, plus one or two other little surprises. Yeah, the captain hates surprises. He'll love these, Luke promised. Surprise number 1 is a set of hyperdrive boosters. Surprise number 2 is an SB-20 security breach droid. He shrugged. Of course, if he doesn't want them, I'll be happy to take them off your hands. Yeah, I'll bet you would, the sentry snorted. Okay, fine. Come on in. You know the en route, or do I gotta draw you a map? I know it, Luke said, mentally crossing his fingers. There were supposedly only 2 safe paths in through the maze of asteroids to this particular base of the Kavrilhu pirates, one of which was safe for the inbound trip, the other for the outbound. He'd pulled visuals for the routes from Pitcher's mind while setting up the healing trance and would feel reasonably confident about tracing out the path in his X-Wing. Doing the same in a lumbering Y-60 Thalasian cargo hauler was another matter entirely, especially when the Y-60 no longer had any sublight drive units behind its central group of drive nozzles. Sure, the sentry sneered. Try not to hit anything big. The display went dead. Luke switched it off from his end, then keyed the makeshift intercom he'd rigged to the hollowed out area where the central drive units had once been. We're on our way, he announced. You doing okay back there? There was a twitter of acknowledgement from R2, along with a warble that sounded distinctly nervous. Don't worry, we'll get through just fine, Luke soothed him. You just make sure the ship's ready to fly. The droid warbled again, and for a moment Luke thought back to the covert shroud gambit he and New Republic intelligence had cooked up for his penetration into the Imperial-held world of Padaris during the Thrawn campaign. There, too, he'd had R2 and his X-Wing stashed aboard a larger ship for a quick exit. But this was a smuggler's freighter they were flying now, not a carefully designed breakaway vehicle. It was going to be a different matter entirely to get the X-Wing clear if they needed to get out of here in a hurry. Well, he'd cross that dune when he reached it. In the meantime, the preferred option would be to keep them from having to make that quick exit at all. And the first step in that was to convince the pirate sentries that he was indeed a legitimate member of their supply network. Resting his hands on the freighter's controls, he ran through his Jedi calming exercises. May the force be with me, he murmured, and headed in. It wasn't nearly as bad as he'd expected. With typical smuggler's finesse, Pinchers had modified the Y-60's engines and control surfaces to make the freighter faster and more maneuverable than its ungainly appearance would have implied, and even with the central drive section removed, there was more than enough power left to do the job. The ship easily handled the sharp turns and backtracks necessary to keep it out of reach of the pirates' defense setup, as well as the more mundane problem of not bumping into any of the asteroids rolling past. The whole trip rather reminded Luke of one of Leia's war stories, the one about the Falcon's dizzying escape through the asteroid field after the rebels' evacuation of Hoth. But of course, he wasn't flying full bore through the floating rock pile the way they had, with TIE fighters and Imperial Star Destroyers breathing down his neck. On his way out, of course, things might be different. He reached the center of the maze to find himself approaching a large but otherwise undistinguished asteroid. According to New Republic intelligence's meager information and supplemented by the snippets he pulled from Pincher's mind, the pirates' base consisted of a series of tunnels and chambers originally burned into the rock by some enterprising but unsuccessful pre Clone Wars mining operation. The landing bays were camouflaged as valleys in the uneven surface, and as Luke approached the asteroid, a ring of lights came on between two sharp edged ridges to indicate his designated landing site. He eased the freighter into the opening, felt a brief jolt as he passed through the atmospheric barrier, and with a multiple bump of landing legs, he was down. A lone man was waiting for him at the bottom of the landing ramp. You Metzio? He demanded gruffly, giving Luke's disguised face a quick once over. His hand, Luke noticed, was resting with total lack of subtlety on the butt of his holstered blaster. You expecting someone else? Luke countered, resting his hand on his own blaster in response, and looking around the landing bay. The room beneath the atmosphere shield ceiling was more or less circular, roughly carved from the rock of the asteroid, with a half dozen pressure doors spaced more or less evenly around the perimeter. Austere in the extreme. Yeah, I'm Mencio. Nice place you got here. We like it, the man said. We just talked to Wesselman. No kidding, Luke said, still looking around. The New Republic intelligence agent on Amoris was supposed to have locked Wesselman away incommunicado for the next few days. If he'd failed, or if the supplier had somehow escaped. I hope you said hi for me. Yeah, we did, the pirate said darkly. He says he's never heard of you. Really, Luke said casually, reaching out to the other with the force. There was a level of suspicion in the pirate's mind, but no hint of the certainty that would mean such a conversation had actually taken place. This had to be a bluff. Or rather, a test. That's funny, you talking to him and all, Luke went on, finishing his inspection and focusing his gaze on the pirate. Wesselman told me he was going to be out of touch for the next few days. He probed the other's mind a little deeper. Heading out to Morstein sector, as I recall. Something about picking up a load of unregistered Tabana gas for you. The pirate gave him a smile that was half sneer, and as he did so, his suspicion faded away. Yeah, that's where he was going, all right, he conceded. Hasn't gotten there yet, though. We're still trying to contact him. Luke shrugged, wishing he knew what Wesselman's exact itinerary was supposed to have been. If the supplier got too far behind schedule, the pirate's suspicions would probably start rising again. Too late to do anything about that now, though. Well, when you do, say hi for me, he said. So, did I pass? The pirate sneered again and lifted his left hand. Four of the six pressure doors slid open and four tough looking thugs stepped through into the landing bay. Holstering their drawn blasters, they headed towards Luke's freighter. Yeah, you passed, he said. You got any fancy locks or booby traps on your cargo hold we should know about? Nope, everything's clear, Luke said. Help yourselves. You got any food around here? That shipboard stuff gets worse every day. Sure, the pirate said, pointing to one of the two doors that hadn't had a guard waiting behind it. Snack area's through there. Don't drink it dry. We'll have you unloaded in a couple of hours, and I don't want you tackling the out route half drunk. It'd make a mess, and I'd be the one who'd have to clean it up. The indicated door led into a room about 10 meters long and 4 wide, with a pair of tables equipped with bench seats arranged down the center. Along the right hand wall stood various music and vid stations. Along the opposite side was a waist-high counter with a gleaming SE-5 service droid waiting behind it. "Good day, fine sir," the droid said brightly as Lucas stepped into the room. "May I be of assistance?" "You got any Tomo-spiced Karkan ribines?" Luke asked, glancing around. There were no exits that he could see that might lead from this room into the rest of the complex. Not surprising, really, considering the sorts of visitors the snack area catered to. "Yes, fine sir, I most certainly do," the droid assured him, shuffling over a few steps and producing a package from beneath the counter. "It will take only a few moments to prepare them." Luke grunted. "Fine." It took just under 4 minutes, in fact, for the droid to heat the slab of rye beans and arrange them artistically on a plate. Luke spent the time wandering around the room, ostensibly looking at the vid stations, actually hunting for hidden spy cams. He'd spotted 3 of them by the time his meal was ready. Even in the completely isolated room, the Kavrilhu pirates weren't taking any chances. "May I provide you something to drink?" the droid asked as he presented Luke with a plate. "Don't bother," Luke said. "I got better stuff on my ship." "Ah," the droid said. "Will you need a set of utensils?" Luke gave him a scornful look. "With spoons? You must be kidding." "Oh," the droid murmured, looking a little nonplussed. "Well, do enjoy, fine sir." Luke turned away, suppressing the out-of-character reflex to thank the droid. Tearing one of the rye beans off the end of the slab, he munched on it and he headed back out into the landing bay. The pirates hadn't been idle in his absence. They'd gotten the Y-60's wide cargo ramp lowered and were beginning to bring the big transport boxes out on repulsor lift floater carts. "I hope you're watching the corners with those things," Luke warned one of them, jabbing towards the floater cart with his rye bean. "I don't want my restraint rings getting all chewed up." "Tuck your teeth in," the other growled, flipping his head to toss a short braid back over one shoulder. "Nothing's going to get chewed up, except maybe your skin if you give us any static." "Yeah, you and who else?" Luke fired back, heading past him up the ramp. "You don't mind if I check for myself?" "Just don't get in the way." There were 2 other pirates in the cargo hold, one just settling his box into place on his floater cart, the other already starting for the ramp with his load. Luke crossed to the side bulkhead, stretching out with the force as he pretended to examine the restraint rings for damage. In the near distance, somewhere down one of the asteroid's corridors, he could sense 2 more of the pirates returning for their next load. He estimated the timing. Yes, he should just be able to make it. The last of the 2 pirates was almost to the ramp now. Grunting with apparent satisfaction as to the delivery of his equipment, Luke changed direction, crossing the hold towards the access door leading into the freighter's living section. The pirate maneuvered his cart down the ramp and turned around to the side of the ship. And for perhaps the next 10 seconds, Luke was alone. There was no time to waste, but he and R2 had had plenty of time to practice on the flight here and had gotten the drill down to a science. Whistling softly, Luke stepped to the box the 2 of them had prepared, at the same time getting a force grip on his ribene plate and sending it flying smoothly across the hold. R2 had heard the whistled signal, opening the access door as the meal neared it. Luke took another moment to ease the plate as far into the living section as he could see, then set it down on the deck and pulled open the side panel on the box beside him. Inside, well packaged against random bumps, was Wesselman's fancy SB-20 security breach droid. It wasn't going to do the pirates any good now, not with most of its insides cut away, but the shell that was left would make an ideal hiding place for a quiet infiltration of their base. Curling himself up, Luke squeezed into the narrow space and pulled the box's side panel closed again. Just in time. Beneath him, the deck vibrated slightly as the returning pirates climbed up the ramp. Luke stretched out with a force, sensing as he did so their sudden suspicion. He ran through his sensory enhancement techniques. "Control, this is Grinner," a murmured voice came to Luke's ears, as clear as if the pirate had been standing right beside him. "You see our smuggler anywhere?" "Last I saw, he was heading into the hold," the faint voice of the pirate Luke had talked to earlier came in response. "Said he was worried about his restraint rings." "Yeah, he was there when we left," another voice agreed. "Fine," Grinner said. "So where is he now?" "Probably inside," the second voice said. "He was headed that direction when Folks and I were leaving, chomping down on a plate of rye beans." Probably looking for something to wash down the tom spice with, a new voice added. He told the service droid he had some good drinking stuff aboard. Maybe, Grinner grunted, the word almost covered over by the soft hiss of metal on steel hide as he drew his blaster. Or maybe he's trying something cute, like hiding in one of these boxes. You want to get a scanner crew down here, Control? Steady, Grinner, the unfamiliar voice advised him. Let me run a check first. For a long moment the hold was silent. Keeping his force hold on the side of the box, Luke unsealed the flap of his tunic and got a grip on his lightsaber. If they didn't buy this, he would have to take them out. You can all decompress, Control's voice said. He's gone inside all right. The plate he took out of the snack room is about 5 meters inside that door in front of you. There's no way he could have stashed it in there and gotten back out to the hold in the... Let's see. In the 9 seconds he was out of sight. There was a faint snort and the sound of Grinner's blaster being holstered again. Yeah, okay, he said. There's just something about this guy I don't like. Luke took his hand off his lightsaber, letting his breath out slowly in a silent sigh of relief. His original idea, back when he'd first borrowed the ship, had been to simply take whatever food he'd scrounged into the box with him. But that plan had felt wrong somehow, and he and R2 had worked out this variation instead. He was very glad now that they had. So get him unloaded and out of here, Control said. You see any sign of that SB-20 droid he said he brought? I want that one next. No. Only droid box I see is an R2 unit. That's the one, Control said. An SB-20 is an R2 shell with espionage gear and programming tucked away inside. Luke's box lurched as the pirate got his float card underneath it. Never heard of it. They're not exactly advertised at droid depots, Control said acidly. The captain's been after Wesselman for one for years. Grinner grunted. And this one just happens to show up here today, huh? Convenient. Give it a rest, Grinner, the other pirate in the hold said. Okay, I've got the droid. Where do you want it? Electronics shop, Control told him. The captain wants Pap and Sync to check it out. Right. A moment later they were off, angling down the ramp and across the landing bay floor. Luke braced himself against the droid shell, listening to the sounds around him and trying to ignore the violent shaking that was really only the small bumps and vibrations of the float cart. He had assumed he would be taken to whatever storage place the rest of the cargo was bound for, which would presumably have given him a certain amount of privacy for his exit from the box. On the other hand, the electronics shop was probably closer to the command areas of the base, which was his ultimate goal. All in all, a fair trade-off. They passed through one of the pressure doors, and for a few minutes the only sounds were the hum of the float cart's repulsor lifts and the pirate's footsteps and raspy breathing. Then, gradually, more sounds began to filter in. Other voices and footsteps, mostly distant but occasionally passing close by. Luke stretched out with the force, sensing a variety of human and alien minds in the vicinity. There was an odd change of echo as they apparently left the corridor and entered a larger room. Another change, this time in reverse, marked where they left the room and passed into a corridor again. The float cart turned around a corner, then another, entered another open space filled with the dull rumble of muted voices. Landius? Control's voice said. Yeah, you got me, the pirate pushing Luke's float cart said. Change of plans. Pap's got something torn apart in the shop and doesn't have room for your droid. Go park it in the level 4 storeroom. Yeah, okay. The float cart slowed and changed direction. Too much to ask for 'em to make up their minds? Very funny, Control growled. Just hustle it, okay? I'm hustling, Landius grumped under his breath. The cart moved on, but even as it again changed corridors, Luke began to feel an odd sensation tingling at the back of his mind. Somewhere, somehow, something had suddenly gone wrong. He stretched out with the force again, trying to track down the sensation. Ahead, a door hissed open and the cart again entered a large room. It seemed to be taking a long time to get across it, and then abruptly the cart stopped. What the pirate spat. Get out of the way, Lanius, the voice of Control boomed over a loudspeaker. You got yourself a rider. The pirate bit out a curse, and there was a scramble of feet as he darted away from the lift cart. All right, whoever you are, Control continued. We know you're in there. We got a clear scan from the security corridor. Come on out. Luke grimaced. So that's what that tingling sensation had been. A premonition of the mess he was now in. A pity he hadn't paid more attention to it, though offhand he couldn't see what he could have done to change anything at that point. And anyway, berating himself for errors in judgment would gain him nothing. Pulling out his comlink, he thumbed it on. R2? He said softly. There was no answer, just a quiet burst of static. Oh, and we've also jammed your transmissions, Control added. I'm afraid the only one you're going to be able to talk to is me. So Luke was on his own. Tucking his lightsaber a little deeper into its hiding place, he sealed the tunic flap loosely across it. Okay, he shouted. Hold your fire. I'm coming out. He released his force grip on the side panel and let it swing open. 3 pirates were visible, standing well back from the box, their blasters steady on him. 5 others, he could sense, were spread out around the box outside his field of view. 5 others, plus a Defel skulking somewhere in the shadows as backup. Once again, they weren't taking any chances. Well, well, Control's voice said as Luke eased his way out of the disemboweled droid and stood up. Took a wrong turn, did you, Mencio? No, I think it was Lanius who took the wrong turn, Luke said, keeping his hands away from his blaster as he looked around. They were in a large, high-ceilinged room with stacked boxes lining 2 of the walls. His box had been set down in an otherwise unoccupied corner away from the rest of the merchandise. The 8 pirates were arrayed in a rough semicircle around him. He didn't spot the Defel, but it was probably somewhere between him and the only door, across the room behind the ring of blasters. I came to see your captain, not your inventory. One of the pirates facing Luke growled something unintelligible. I think you ought to know that Hensing there really despises sarcastic jinx, Control said. Really, Luke said, sending another casual glance towards the door area. The glow panel switch was just to the side of the panel, a simple push plate that he could trigger with the Force. Perfect. Sorry to hear that. You could get a lot sorrier, Control warned. He has a theory that jinx get less sarcastic when they've had a hand or two blown off. Luke smiled grimly, flexing the fingers of his artificial right hand. He's right about that, he said. Take my word for it. Just so we understand each other, Control said. Take out your blaster. I'm sure you know the routine. Sure, Luke said, pulling out his blaster with exaggerated care and lowering it to the floor in front of him. You want the spare power packs, too? He asked, pointing to the small flat boxes riding the other side of his gun belt. No, you're welcome to hide behind them if you'd like, Control said. Just kick the blaster away from you. Luke complied, using the Force to make sure the weapon skidded to a halt precisely at Hensing's feet. Happy? Happier than you're going to be, Control said. I don't think you realize how much trouble you're in here, Mencio. It was time, Luke decided, to switch tacks. Fine. No more nonsense, he said, putting an edge into both his voice and his posture. I'm here to talk to your captain about making a deal. If Control was impressed by the new Mencio, his voice didn't show it. Sure you are, he said. What, you couldn't call for an appointment? I wanted to check out your security, Luke told him. See if you're the sort of people my employer would be interested in doing business with. And what would this business consist of? I was instructed to discuss it with your captain, Luke said loftily. Not underlings. Henson growled again, lifting his blaster. Then your employer is either stupid or a fool or both, Control said. You have 5 seconds to give me something solid. After that, I turn Hensing loose on you. If you insist, Luke said, crossing his arms across his chest and looking around the room at the glow panel switch. That warning tinkle had returned. We understand that you're using clones to crew some of your ships. We want to discuss hiring some of them from you. Control tissed. Sorry. Wrong answer. Take him. The pirates lifted their blasters, and reaching out through the force, Luke flipped off the glow panels. There was a snarled curse, almost drowned out by the sputtering of multiple blaster bolts cutting through the air where Luke had been standing. But Luke was no longer there. A force-strengthened leap had sent him sailing over their heads towards the door, lightsaber ready in his hand. If they'd been overconfident enough not to leave a guard outside the door. There was a flicker of premonition, and he had the lightsaber in guard position just as he spotted the Defel's pale red eyes gazing down at him from the top of one of the stacks of boxes. He sensed rather than saw the weapon tracking towards him, igniting the lightsaber just as the blaster's flash sparked from between the red eyes. The green blade blazed into existence, startlingly bright in the darkness, deflecting the Defel's blaster bolt harmlessly away. But even as he hit the floor beside the door, Luke realized the Defel had won this round. His shot had missed, but he had forced Luke to reveal both his location and his true identity. The other pirates weren't slow in picking up on either. Someone across the room swore. "It's Skywalker!" another shouted, and suddenly a fresh volley of blaster fire was raining through the air towards him. Luke backed to the door, letting the Force guide his defense. The door had probably been sealed. Jumping sideways towards it to temporarily throw off his opponent's aim, he slashed twice with his lightsaber. A flat dive out the opening, and he was free. The corridor outside was deserted. Rolling back to his feet, lightsaber at the ready, he stretched out with the Force, seeking the ambush that must surely be lurking nearby. But there were no other presences that he could detect. "Giving up already?" he asked. "Hardly," Control's voice came from a speaker set into the ceiling a few meters away. "Rather foolish of you to give away your identity so quickly." "I prefer to think of it as an overabundance of confidence," Luke countered, stretching out a little harder. Still nothing. And if he'd really caught them off guard, it wouldn't be smart to give them time to regroup. Picking what he hoped was the direction he'd come from, he set off at a fast trot. "You ready to tell me where you're getting your clones from?" he added towards the speaker. "I'd really rather not have to hunt down your captain and ask him personally." "Hunt all you like," Control said, his voice now coming from a different speaker farther down the corridor. Clearly they were tracking Luke's movements. "You won't find anyone here who knows, but thank you for confirming that was what you came here to learn." "You're welcome," Luke said, clenching his teeth as the tingle of danger again tugged at him. Ahead, the corridor curved gently to the right, and somewhere beyond the curve he could finally sense other presences waiting for him. It was a classic bottle squeeze setup. Pin the enemy in a curve or angle where he would be trapped in a crossfire without the two ends of the crossfire shooting at each other. He could sense the pirates he'd left behind in the storeroom piling out into the corridor now. A few more heartbeats and there would be blaster fire coming at his back. But the pirates' contingency plans were unlikely to have included the possibility of a Jedi running loose in their base. Just this side of the curve, a heavy blast door revealed the presence of a side corridor leading out of the trap to the left. The blaster he'd left back in the storeroom wouldn't have made a dent in it, but he had a far more efficient way of opening doors than the pirates could have anticipated. Skidding to a stop in front of the blast door, he ignited his lightsaber and slashed through the lock mechanism. It began sliding ponderously open. There was a flicker of warning, and Luke spun around just in time to sweep the lightsaber blade across three incoming blaster bolts. The pirates from the storeroom, seeing their bottle squeeze about to fail, were charging full speed towards him, firing as they ran. Luke blocked two more bolts, the rest were going wide, and ducked through the still opening blast door into a wide corridor. The corridor's appearance was a surprise. Unlike the rough-hewn feel of the rest of the base, this area looked like it might have been transplanted straight from inside a capital warship. Smooth metal-lined walls formed a square cross-section about 4 meters wide, the corridor itself stretching 20 meters before ending in a T-junction with another of the more typical rocky corridors. The only light was the spillover coming from behind Luke and the similar glow from the far end. Even so, there was enough illumination to see that all the surfaces of the corridor, walls, ceiling, and floor, were covered with a decorative pattern of 3 centimeter diameter circles spaced about 10 centimeters apart. The corridor itself was deserted, and Luke could sense no one was skulking around the corners ahead. Apparently, he had indeed caught them off guard, but his danger sense was still tingling. Something about the corridor? Still, with two groups of enemies behind him, there was nowhere to go but through. Senses alert for a trap, he headed down the corridor. He'd made it 4 steps when, without warning, gravity abruptly reversed itself, sending him falling towards the ceiling. There was no chance for physical or mental preparation. His head and shoulders slammed into the metal, sending a jolt of pain arcing through him, the rest of his body tumbling down with a dull thud and more pain. He gasped for breath. The impact had knocked most of the air out of him. But before he could get more than half a lungful, he was falling again, this time sideways towards one of the side walls. He landed hard on his right side, a fresh stab of pain lancing through head and shoulder and hip as he scrabbled around for a handhold. But there was nothing to grip on the smooth metal. Stretching out to the force, he sensed the gravitational field starting to change again, and then his new floor suddenly became the ceiling again, and he was falling towards the far wall. But not toward flat metal this time. Twisting his head around, he saw what he'd taken to be decorative circles drawn in the wall were in fact the heads of flat-tipped metal rods. They had extruded outward from the wall now, rising like a forest of blunted spears to meet his descent. Clenching his teeth, Luke reached out to the force and threw out his hands to meet the oncoming bars. With their tight spacing, there was no chance for him to slide between them, but if he could grab two of them and slow his fall, he could at least keep from landing on them at full speed. He caught hold of the two pointed at his face and chest, reaching to the force for the strength to slow himself. He succeeded, and for a brief moment held himself balanced away over them in midair. And then he was slammed onto them anyway, as a corresponding set of bars from the wall behind him jabbed hard into his back and legs, driving him forward. He grunted as the wind was again knocked out of him, trying to twist around against the forest of bars digging into him. But even as he struggled to work his left arm through the rods pinning it, two more sets of bars slid out from the floor and ceiling, slamming into his shoulders, head, and legs and pinning him even tighter in place. There was another flurry of gravity changes that did little except jam every part of his body in random turn against the various sets of bars. And then gravity settled back to its original vector, leaving him suspended more or less upright in the room. Well, well, Control's mocking voice said into the silence. Surprised, are we? A little, Luke conceded, fighting past the dizziness left over from the gravity changes and looking around as best he could, with his head pinioned rigidly in place. The entire corridor had become a huge three-dimensional crosshatch of rods, filling the whole space between the blast doors that had slid into place at both ends, sealing him inside. We set this up about 5 years ago, Control continued. Your Yavin Academy was seeding the galaxy with cocky little would-be Jedi, and we figured it would be only a matter of time before one of them dropped in on us. So we figured to have a surprise ready for them. Never figured on having the Grand High Moffling himself show up. So what do you think? It's inventive, I'll give you that, Luke said, testing the strength of the bars with his shoulders and arms. He might have saved himself the effort. I hope you're not expecting it to hold me for long. You might be surprised, Control said. I take it you haven't noticed where your lightsaber ended up? Luke couldn't even remember when during all of those gravity switches he dropped it. Now, straining out of the corner of his eye, he spotted the weapon 15 meters away across the room, wedged just like he was within the interlocking sets of bars. You can see it's a tighter group of bars over at that end, Control pointed out. Holds the thing pretty solidly in place. Luke smiled. Clearly, for all his preparation, the pirate hadn't learned enough about Jedi. Reaching out with the Force, he activated the lightsaber switch. With a snap hiss, the green blade flashed into existence. Reaching out again, Luke attempted to twist the handle sideways. Nothing happened. You see the genius of the design, Control said conversationally. It's held at just the right angle so that the blade sticks out in the gap between bars without touching any of them. Clever, huh? Luke didn't answer. The lightsaber seemed to be solidly wedged into place. But if the blade wasn't touching the bars, the handle ought to slide freely either backward or forward. Getting a force grip on it, he slid it forward. Oh, it'll go that direction all right, Control said as the lightsaber began to move. Unless it gets hung up by its switch or something. But that won't do you any good. The blade still won't touch any of the bars. The tip of the blade had reached the wall now. Luke continued forcing it that direction, pushing the blade straight into the metal plating. And naturally, we weren't stupid enough to put any critical equipment behind the walls for you to cut into, Control finished. A little more impressed now, are we? Maybe a little, Luke said. Now what? What do you think? Control retorted, his voice suddenly dark. We know what you Jedi can do, Skywalker. Don't think we don't. I figure from that little ride through our base alone, you probably already dug out enough dirty silt about our operation to send everyone here to Fargerun or Buchan for the next 20 years. You think we're going to just sit here and let you do that to us? You're crazy. Luke grimaced with the irony. Control was right. Using his full Jedi strength, he almost certainly could have invaded the pirates' minds that deeply. But with his new reluctance to use his power so casually, he had in fact done nothing of the sort. So what do you want to do? Make a deal? Hardly, Control said. We want you to die. Really, Luke said dryly. The bars here might be too strong for human muscle, but that was hardly the limiting factor for a Jedi. Bending enough of the bars out of the way for him to get to his lightsaber would be a long and tedious job, but he had more than enough depth in the Force to accomplish it. From old age, or do you have something more immediate in mind? I'm actually kind of sorry, Control said. Seems a waste dusting you like this, especially after what this Jedi trap cost to build. But no one's offering bounties on captured Jedi these days. Even if they were, I don't suppose that cage would hold you long enough for us to collect. So there it is. Goodbye, Skywalker. There was a click, and the speaker went dead. And in the silence, Luke heard a sound that hadn't been there before. The quiet hiss of escaping gas. He took a deep breath, stretching out to the Force. There were Jedi poison neutralizing techniques that should be able to handle whatever they were pumping in at him. Still, he'd better not dawdle on getting out of here. Closing his eyes, reaching more deeply to the Force, he began bending one of the bars away from his face. And then suddenly, his eyes snapped open as the truth belatedly hit him. The pirates weren't pumping poison in. They were pumping the air out. And not even a Jedi could survive for long without air. Luke took another deep breath, pushing away his rising fear. A Jedi must act when he is calm, at peace with the Force. All right. R2 and the X-Wing might already be in the pirates' hands. Even if they weren't, there was no way for the snub fighter to maneuver its way through the cramped and twisting corridors. He was on his own here, with no resources but the few pieces of equipment he was carrying. A comlink, glow rod, data pad, and 2 spare blaster power packs. Luke reached out with the Force, lifting the small flat boxes off his belt and floating them up to where he could see them. Back during the height of the rebellion, the mechanical genius General Aaron Kraken had found a way to rig blaster power packs to explode. All it took was 2 or more packs fastened together with their overload storm dowels removed, and in 30 seconds they would blow up with the power of a medium-sized grenade. The blast should have enough power to shatter or twist any of the bars in its immediate vicinity. Unfortunately, it would do similar damage to Luke himself. But with a little ingenuity, it was the work of a few seconds to remove the overloaded dowels from the power packs. Then, holding them pressed together with the Force, he maneuvered them carefully through the maze of bars towards the far blast door. If Control was still monitoring him, and if the pirate knew about this trick, he would probably conclude that Luke was trying to punch a hole in the blast door and let in some air. He would also undoubtedly conclude that the metal was more than strong enough to withstand such an explosion, which was fine with Luke. The longer the pirates operated under false assumptions, the slower they would react when they finally figured out what he really had in mind. His makeshift bomb was nearly to the blast doors now, with only about 10 seconds left to go. Keeping the bomb moving, he reached out to the Force and slid his lightsaber backward along its single line of free movement until the belt ring was pressing against the wall. The bomb reached the other end of the lightsaber's track, and Luke settled it there against one of the bars. The critical question now, he knew, was whether the explosion and resulting burst of shrapnel might damage the lightsaber. On sudden impulse, he stretched out and ignited the weapon, bringing the green blade snapping out to point directly towards the bomb. The blade should disintegrate whatever shrapnel hit it, providing at least some protection for the handle and the mechanism inside. Now there was nothing to do but wait and fight to keep from passing out in the rapidly thinning atmosphere. And with a tremendous blast of fire and thunder, 3 seconds early, the power packs blew up. Luke bit down hard as a dozen red hot metal splinters stabbed and slashed into his left arm and side, but the results were all that he could have hoped for. Across the room, visible through the drifting smoke, the neat array of bars had been altered by the explosion. Not much, but maybe enough. Reaching out to the Force, he slid the lightsaber forward to the bomb-mangled bars and twisted the handle. Not much, but indeed enough. The lightsaber, partially freed from its confinement, could now reach to the side just enough to snick off the end of one of the nearest bars. Luke twisted again, this time sending 2 more bars clattering to the floor. He twisted again and again, each sweep going a little wider as he methodically carved out some space around the lightsaber. And suddenly the weapon was free, spinning like a propeller as it cut through everything in its path. White spots were beginning to dance in front of Luke's eyes as he sent the weapon through the blast door, cutting a triangular hole that brought a welcome gush of air rushing into the partial vacuum. He took a deep breath, and as his vision cleared, he brought the lightsaber back towards him, the spinning blade mowing through the bars like a scythe through a field of tall grain. A minute later, he was back in the rocky corridors, thumbing on his comlink as he headed for the landing bay in his ship. "R2?" he called. "You there?" The only answer was another burst of jamming static. Picking up his pace, using Jedi techniques to suppress the pain in his side and arm, he prepared himself for the pirate's next move. But that move didn't come. He emerged from the corridor into a large but deserted chamber and crossed into another corridor without seeing or sensing anyone. For that matter, he hadn't sensed anyone since his escape from their Jedi trap. Were they all hiding somewhere? Or had they all simply packed up and left? The rock floor beneath his feet shook slightly, and somewhere in the distance he heard the faint sound of an explosion. He was through the corridor and into another room when he heard and felt a second explosion, this one noticeably closer. And abruptly, his comlink twittered. He thumbed it on. "R2?" "Not quite," a familiar voice answered dryly. "Are you in trouble again, Skywalker?" Luke blinked with surprise, then smiled with the first genuine pleasure he'd felt since arriving at this place. "Of course I am," he told Mara Jade. "Have you ever known me when I wasn't?" And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you all soon.